70%. That's the share of corporate change initiatives globally that fail to achieve their original objectives. The decisions get made, the PowerPoints get presented, the strategies get approved, and then nothing happens. Or worse, the wrong thing happens at exactly the wrong speed.
Japan's companies have a different number. Research on transformation success rates consistently finds that successful Japanese corporate transformations have 63% of employees actively supporting the change. Failed ones have 30%. That 33 percentage point gap doesn't come from better strategy decks or more charismatic leadership. It comes from a fundamentally different theory about when exactly a decision actually gets made.
In most Western corporations, a decision is made when the executive signs off. In Japan, a decision is made when everyone who will implement it has already agreed to it.
That sounds like a subtle distinction. It is not. The process is called Ringi, written with the characters for deliberation and proposal. It is a bottom-up approval system that has governed Japanese corporate decision-making since at least the Meiji era, when large industrial firms needed a way to coordinate choices across sprawling hierarchies without a phone network or an email server in sight.
Here is how it works. When a manager at, say, Toyota's procurement division wants to change how the company sources a particular component, she doesn't send an email to her boss and wait for a yes. She writes a document, a ringisho, an approval request paper, that outlines the proposal, its rationale, projected costs, and expected outcomes. Then she walks that document, physically or now digitally, through every manager whose work will be touched by the change.
Each one reviews it. Each one stamps it with their personal hanko, a small cylindrical seal usually carved from wood or stone that functions as a legally binding signature in Japanese business life, and before any of them sees the formal document, the proposer will have already had private, individual conversations with each of them.
This pre-circling process has its own word, nemawashi. It comes from gardening. Literally, it means digging carefully around the roots of a tree to prepare it for transplanting. In business, it means ensuring that every stakeholder has already heard your idea, raised their objections, had their concerns addressed, and privately nodded before the formal process ever begins.
According to workplace research published by Ed Steller in New Arliu, nemawashi typically consumes 60 to 70% of a project's total timeline. That number horrifies Western observers. It shouldn't.
Consider what that 60 to 70% actually buys. When former Toyota Vice President Russ Skafty described the company's internal approval process to researchers, he put it plainly: we would write the A3 and identify all parties who needed to sign off. The A3 is Toyota's single-page problem-solving document, named for the paper size it fits on. It forces radical clarity. But the document is not the point. By the time that document circulates formally, Skafty noted, all questions were answered and consensus was built in advance. The final meeting with senior leadership wasn't a decision meeting, it was a confirmation meeting.
Toyota's
McKinsey's analysis of Japanese versus non-Japanese corporate transformation projects tells the story from the other side. Successful transformations had 63% supportive employees. Failed ones had 30%. The difference wasn't better planning or bigger budgets. It was the degree to which affected people had been genuinely consulted before the decision was announced.
Toyota takes 9 months to decide. It doesn't then spend 2 years fighting itself about whether to actually do it.
Most Western management theory optimizes for decision speed. The working assumption is that a fast, imperfect decision beats a slow, perfect one. Move fast, fail fast, iterate fast. Jeff Bezos famously sorted decisions into type E, irreversible, requiring careful deliberation, and type E, reversible, requiring speed. The implication push most decisions into type E and move.
The Ringi system is built on a different calculation entirely. It treats the decision and its implementation not as separate events, but as a single process. And it measures the total cost of both.
A decision that takes 3 weeks to reach but 6 months to execute costs more than a decision that takes 3 months to reach but 6 days to execute. When you measure total cycle time, from first proposal to fully operational outcome, Japanese companies often win even though they lose visibly at the decision stage.
This is the engineering insight embedded in Ringi nemawashi doesn't slow the process. It front-loads the resistance. Every objection that would have erupted at the implementation stage gets surfaced, addressed, and resolved during the proposal phase. By the time a ringisho reaches its final approver, there is no ambiguity, no resentment, no hidden dissent. Everyone in the room has already agreed, and they agreed before anyone asked them publicly, which in Japan's group-oriented corporate culture means they are not going to quietly undermine it afterward.
The hanko stamp is often mocked as an anachronism, a feudal-era relic forcing executives to physically press a cylinder of hardwood into a red ink pad. During COVID, when offices shut down, some Japanese companies genuinely could not process approvals because no one could reach the building to stamp paper. The image became a punchline.
But the hanko was never really about the ink. It was about making accountability visible and undeniable. When your personal seal is on a document, you cannot claim you didn't see it, didn't understand it, or didn't agree. The stamp creates a physical record of consent that Western email threads rarely achieve. Japanese law assigns direct responsibility to the hanko holder for what they approved.
Japan's litigation rate reflects the broader cultural logic of this system. A foundational cross-national study found that fewer than 1% of automobile accidents involving death or serious injury in Japan resulted in litigation. In the United States, that figure was 21.5%. The preference for resolving disputes before they harden into formal conflict runs from traffic accidents all the way to boardrooms.
When everyone has genuinely signed off, the grounds for argument largely disappear. But every system has its shadow form. In Iridesis wo Toshiba revealed it had overstated profits by $1 billion by $1 billion yen over 7 years. An independent investigation found that 98 executives were actively involved in the misrepresentation. Senior management did not merely look away. The investigators concluded that top leadership actively encouraged the improper accounting practices.
The third-party report described a corporate culture in which operational managers couldn't refuse the aggressive profit targets demanded from above. The consensus system had inverted. Instead of proposals flowing upward for honest review, pressure was flowing downward and collecting stamps from managers who knew the numbers were wrong but would not put their hanko on a document saying so.
Nemawashi, done honestly, surfaces problems early. Nemawashi, under intimidation, buries them. The difference is entirely cultural and almost invisible from outside the firm. The same mechanism that creates organizational coherence can, when leadership is corrupt or simply frightened, create organizational silence.
This is the dual nature of the system. It produces remarkable outcomes when people use it to genuinely seek truth. It produces catastrophic cover-ups when people use it to seek approval for what has already been decided by someone with power over them.
Japan's companies are now in active negotiation with this legacy. Younger TIC firms have adapted nemawashi principles without the paper. Mercari, Japan's first TIC unicorn, founded in Nisenjursan and reaching $15 billion in market value within a decade, builds extensive stakeholder feedback loops into its product development cycle. Not because Mercari executives read Meiji-era management manuals, but because the logic holds test consensus before you scale. Rakuten has explicitly combined traditional hospitality philosophy with agile development methodology, blending two cultural frameworks that look incompatible from the outside.
More structurally, Toyota introduced what it called the three-stamp movement, restricting Ringi approvals to 3 signatories in place of the 10 or 12 that major proposals once required. Faster, but still accountable. The hanko remains, the queue shrinks.
Research on what Ed Steller calls agile nemawashi, a compressed version of the consensus building cycle, shows 30% faster proposal approvals while maintaining full stakeholder alignment. The idea is not to eliminate the route tending, it is to do it faster and with fewer meetings.
Japan's corporate governance reform wave, which accelerated sharply after the Tokyo Stock Exchange's Nisen Refren pressure campaign on companies trading below book value, has further sharpened this. The Japan Association of Corporate Directors noted in April Nisen Refruk that board effectiveness and leadership quality are now central governance priorities alongside shareholder returns. Boards that deliberate endlessly without executing are losing the protection that consensus once provided.
The critique of Japan's decision-making culture misidentifies what is actually slow. Japan is slow at approving proposals, it is fast at executing them. The Western model is the reverse: decisions move quickly, and implementation battles last for years. Neither is obviously superior, but the Japanese model has a structural advantage in contexts where execution quality matters more than decision speed. In manufacturing precision, in safety-critical engineering, in industries where a wrong turn costs not months but decades to correct.
The deeper insight is this: Ringi treats consensus not as a courtesy but as infrastructure. Getting everyone to agree before you move is not the polite way to do things in Japan. It is the engineering solution to the problem of making large organizations move as a single organism.
Other cultures decide and then manage resistance. Japan manages resistance and then decides. The slowness is not a bug, it is the load-bearing wall.
Japan is now racing to modernize its corporate processes, to stamp digitally, to approve in weeks instead of months, to compete on timelines that global markets and activist shareholders demand. Some of that acceleration is genuine progress. Some of it may prove more expensive than it appears.
The question worth watching is whether the speed Japan is gaining from dismantling the slower parts of its decision-making culture will be worth the organizational coherence it may be losing in the process.
The Japanese verb for planting a tree and for building consensus is the same word. That was never an accident.